Before the internet turned every strange event into viral content within hours, there was a haunting so public and so undeniable that it brought an entire American city to a standstill in the winter of 1974. The Lindley Street case in Bridgeport, Connecticut, became one of the most documented and witnessed paranormal events in modern history, not because someone captured it on a smartphone or posted about it on social media, but because police officers, firefighters, city officials, journalists, and hundreds of everyday citizens saw furniture moving on its own and filed official reports that still exist today in municipal archives. This was not a ghost story whispered in the dark. This was a spectacle that unfolded in broad daylight on a working-class street in a bustling Connecticut city, and what happened there defied every attempt at rational explanation. November 21, 1974 started as an ordinary Thursday for the Gooden family. Gerard and Laura Gooden lived with their 10-year-old adopted daughter Marcia in a modest home on Lindley Street, a quiet residential block where neighbors knew each other by name and nothing remarkable ever seemed to happen. The Goodens were unremarkable people leading unremarkable lives. Gerard worked a steady job. Laura maintained their home. Marcia attended local schools. They were not seeking attention. They were not interested in publicity. They simply wanted to live their lives in peace. But on that November day, peace ended for the Gooden family in a way that would change their lives forever. It began with the refrigerator. Laura Gooden was in the kitchen when she noticed the appliance had moved several inches from its usual position against the wall. She assumed her husband had moved it for some reason and thought nothing more of it. But later that same day, she walked into the kitchen to find the refrigerator had moved again, this time nearly a foot away from the wall. No one had been in the kitchen. No one had touched it. The heavy appliance, filled with food and weighing several hundred pounds, had somehow relocated itself across the linoleum floor. Over the next few hours, the activity escalated rapidly. A television set that had been sitting securely on a stand was found lying on its side in the middle of the living room. Chairs overturned without anyone near them. A kitchen table shifted position. Most disturbing of all, a massive cast iron stove, the kind that takes multiple grown men to move even a few inches, slid across the floor while family members watched in horror. The Goodens did what any frightened family would do. They called the police. What happened next transformed a private family crisis into a public phenomenon. The responding officers from the Bridgeport Police Department arrived expecting to find a domestic disturbance or perhaps evidence of an intruder. What they found instead was something their training had never prepared them for. As they stood in the Gooden home taking statements, furniture moved in front of them, not violently, not with dramatic crashes or supernatural theatrics. The objects simply moved, as though being pushed by invisible hands, sliding across floors with no visible cause. The officers looked at each other, looked at the family, and looked back at the furniture that had just relocated itself while they watched. The police filed official reports documenting what they had witnessed. These were not civilians prone to superstition or imagination. These were trained law enforcement professionals whose job required them to observe and report facts accurately. Their reports stated clearly and without embellishment that they had personally observed objects moving with no apparent physical cause. Word spread quickly through the Bridgeport Police Department. More officers responded to the scene, some out of duty and some out of sheer curiosity. They came as skeptics and left as witnesses. News of the Lindley Street haunting spread through Bridgeport like wildfire. Local reporters arrived to cover what they assumed would be a quirky human interest story. City officials came to investigate complaints about the disturbance. Fire department personnel responded to calls from concerned neighbors. University researchers heard about the case and traveled to Bridgeport to document and study the phenomena. And they all witnessed the same things: furniture moving, objects relocating, a refrigerator sliding across a kitchen floor with no one touching it. One city official who visited the Gooden home and watched the refrigerator move stated publicly to the press that he could offer no explanation for what he had seen. His credibility and position made his testimony particularly significant. This was not someone seeking attention or publicity. This was a municipal employee doing his job who happened to witness something that contradicted everything he understood about how the physical world operates. Police officers gave on-the-record statements to journalists saying flatly that they had seen things inside the Gooden home they could not explain. The number of credible witnesses grew daily. As word spread beyond Bridgeport, paranormal investigators began arriving to study the case. Among them were Ed and Lorraine Warren, already well known in 1974 for their decades of work investigating supernatural phenomena across New England and beyond. The Warrens brought something other investigators lacked, a framework for understanding what was happening based on their extensive experience with similar cases. They had seen poltergeist activity before. They knew the patterns and the signs. Ed Warren observed Marcia carefully and noted something crucial. The activity was most intense when the 10-year-old girl was present and diminished or stopped entirely when she was not in the house. This was a classic pattern in poltergeist cases. The phenomena centered on a living person, typically an adolescent, who appeared to be the unwitting focus of paranormal activity. But Lorraine Warren, who claimed clairvoyant abilities that allowed her to sense spiritual presences, perceived something her husband's observations could not detect. She sensed an external entity, something that was not part of Marcia herself, but was using the child as a conduit or focal point for its manifestations. This distinction was critical in how the Warrens understood the Lindley Street case. They did not believe Marcia was consciously or unconsciously creating the phenomena through her own psychic energy. They believed something separate and external had attached itself to the child and was using her presence to create physical disturbances in the material world. The question that haunted the investigators was why? Why this family? Why this child? Why now? The Warrens had theories based on their demonological framework, but absolute answers remained elusive. The media attention transformed Lindley Street into a circus. Thousands of curiosity seekers descended on the quiet residential block, parking their cars along the street, standing on lawns, peering through windows, hoping to witness the phenomena that had been reported in newspapers and on television. The neighborhood became gridlocked. Residents who had nothing to do with the Gooden family found their daily lives disrupted by crowds of strangers. The spectacle added enormous pressure to an already traumatized family trying to cope with impossible circumstances. City officials grew increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. The crowds posed safety concerns. The ongoing media coverage was giving Bridgeport unwanted attention. Authorities made the decision to temporarily remove the Gooden family from their home, citing concerns for their safety and well-being. The forced displacement added another layer of trauma to a family already dealing with phenomena that defied comprehension. They were separated from their home not because of any wrongdoing, but because what was happening to them had become too public and too disruptive to ignore. The Lindley Street haunting did not end with a dramatic exorcism or a final confrontation between investigators and demonic forces. There was no climactic moment when the entity was banished and peace restored. Instead, the case simply wound down. After the family was removed from the home and media attention gradually subsided, they were eventually allowed to return. The activity diminished over time and eventually stopped. Whether this was connected to changes in Marcia as she grew older, to spiritual interventions by clergy and investigators, or to the simple fact that the energy and attention that fed the phenomena were no longer present at the same intensity, no one could definitively say. The legacy of the Bridgeport Poltergeist extends far beyond the Gooden family and that one frightening winter in 1974. The case remains one of the most heavily documented and publicly witnessed paranormal events in American history. The involvement of police officers who filed written reports, city officials who gave public statements, and journalists who documented everything as it happened gave the Lindley Street case an evidentiary foundation that most paranormal cases lack. Ed and Lorraine Warren referenced the case frequently in their lectures and writings as proof that supernatural phenomena could occur anywhere, witnessed by multiple credible observers, defying rational explanation. For the skeptics, the Bridgeport case presented uncomfortable questions. How do you explain away testimony from trained police officers? How do you dismiss eyewitness accounts from city officials with nothing to gain from fabricating stories? How do you rationalize documented reports from dozens of independent witnesses, all describing the same phenomena? The usual explanations for alleged paranormal activity, mass hysteria, deliberate hoax, misidentification of natural events, become increasingly difficult to apply when the witness list includes law enforcement professionals and municipal employees acting in their official capacity. For believers, the Lindley Street haunting confirmed what they already suspected, that the boundary between the physical world and whatever lies beyond it is thinner and more permeable than mainstream society wants to acknowledge. The case demonstrated that paranormal activity does not confine itself to remote locations or occur only to people predisposed to believe in it. It can erupt in the middle of a city, in an ordinary family's home, witnessed by anyone who happens to be present. Today, the house on Lindley Street still stands in Bridgeport, and the neighborhood has long since returned to the quiet anonymity it knew before November 1974. The crowds are gone. The media has moved on to other stories. The Gooden family disappeared from public view decades ago, seeking the privacy that was stolen from them during those terrifying weeks when their home became the epicenter of something no one could explain. But the documented evidence remains in police reports, in newspaper archives, in the files maintained by the Warrens and other investigators who studied the case. The Bridgeport Poltergeist stands as a reminder that sometimes, in the middle of ordinary life in an ordinary place, the impossible becomes undeniably real. Hashtags: Paranormal Documentary, True Crime Haunted House, Poltergeist Activity Ed, and Lorraine Warren Connecticut Haunting, 1974 Supernatural Mysteries, Unsolved Mysteries, Creepy Stories, Ghost Stories, Real Paranormal Cases, Demonic Activity Scary. But true, this story was created with AI assistance, based on documented paranormal case files. All events reference real investigations by Ed and Lorraine Warren.